Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Code Sherpas, another episode of Code Sherpas Talks. Thank you for joining us today, where we will have a live conversation with Valentina Kupak about how to effectively scale teams with junior developers. My name is Cristina Verdi. I'm founder and technical coach here at Code Sherpas. I'm hosting this event today. So before moving forward to the live conversation with Valentina, please let me briefly introduce you a little bit about Code Sherpas Talks and how to participate in this conversation. So Code Sherpas Talks is the space where we organize talks and events for the community. And in this space, we put free and open knowledge within everyone's reach. And basically, our aim is for you to find here regularly knowledge pills in order to advance your career or help others advance theirs. So today we are very honored to have with us Valentina Kupak. So Valentina, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, so I work as a technical coach for software development companies, and I help teams to deliver more quality software faster by using test-driven development and clean architecture. And basically, I help companies the whole way in terms of building the team. So starting with recruitment of the team to onboarding and coaching and getting them to produce results on the real product. So not some demo training, but actually applying these skill sets on the real product. And ultimately, the benefits that the company gets is reduced maintenance costs and more reliable software. And junior developers are definitely a big focus for in all of this in helping companies scale. So I'm really excited to be talking about this topic today. I'm not sure if I can hear you.
Yeah, I was muted. So yeah, thank you for being with us today. And for the people who would like to join the conversation, you can basically prompt your questions on the chat, and we will see it. And Valentina will have the chance to answer all your questions regarding this topic of how to effectively scale teams with junior developers. So moving forward with the first question, Valentina, so we're talking about how to scale teams, but why companies would like to do this? What are the challenges they are facing today? Hi, Amin. Thank you for being here.
Okay, so the key challenges that companies are facing in scaling teams, well, there's two challenges. The first challenge is the recruitment challenge, so finding developers or finding the right developers, and the secondary challenge is onboarding and getting the new developers to be productive in a short time. So the first challenge, the recruitment challenge, is that companies, when they need to scale fast, they want to get someone who already has the knowledge, the skill set. So they're typically targeting mid-years and seniors because they expect with them that they will be able to ramp up really fast. But the problem is that it's harder to find these people. It's a much smaller a number of developers who actually might satisfy the company's standards. That's the first challenge faced. And the second challenge that's faced is when these developers are actually recruited into the company, the onboarding time. So the company might not have any code standards, or if the company doesn't have CI/CD test automation, then this new developer is actually a risk to the product. It takes them time to familiarize themselves with the product. They may also cause bugs, also taking up maybe a lot of time from other existing employees, and then something where management was expecting a speed up, they actually get initially a slowdown. So I would say those are the two primary challenges in scaling, so recruitment and onboarding.
Yeah, that's I totally agree with that. In my experience, it's really it's time consuming to onboard new joiners in the team, and at the same time, companies want to keep delivering quality software as fast as possible. And yeah, so in your opinion, how could we overcome all these challenges?
Okay, so I would say to overcome the challenges, the company firstly needs to set the right foundation. The problem is that initially, when the company is at a smaller size, so both smaller team and smaller scope product, they might not have any systematic way of working. It might be a very chaotic way of working driven by superheroes. There's actually no system in place, there's no quality in place. They are just relying on the minds of certain people who just know everything about the project in their head. So the first challenge is, before scaling, to actually set the right foundations in the existing system. Because if you don't set up, practices like CI/CD and TDD, and you hire many developers in a short amount of time, it will just destabilize the software. So to summarize, the solution is get those technical, both organizational foundations, like getting the team to work in an organized way, as well as these technical practices, and then you can actually scale effectively. But this takes time, and companies who haven't done it but immediately need to scale, they will just end up with multiplication of spaghetti code and a much worse situation.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel that setting up these practices, these foundational practices like TDD, CI/CD, it also takes time. Takes time for companies to do that. So how can they, I don't know, achieve those results faster? Maybe.
Mm-hmm. I would say starting small and doing it incrementally. So instead of approaching it as a huge project like all or nothing, or trying to convert an entire large product to adopt these practices, that's too difficult. But instead, starting in smaller steps. The first step is, I would say, the part of CI/CD. Build automation and deployment automation, but not test automation. Those are the ones which should take, less time. So it's more about infrastructure setup, and that's already one part of CI/CD. Then when we get onto test automation, especially in products where there's no test automation at all, this, to achieve it, would take a longer time. So the team should actually start to apply test automation on a certain subset of the product. So maybe on a certain important module, or a module which is actually linked to their day-to-day work, and try to get these practices demonstrated on at least that part of the code, and then that should serve as a reference example. so that the team can then propagate those practices through the rest of the code, and also that when new employees join, that at least they have that reference code to serve as an example.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for example, do you know about any companies that have successfully implemented this model?
Well, in terms of successful companies, aside from Google, Amazon, eBay, and those kinds, and maybe some other larger companies at that scale, well, they've implemented it. But when we look at the majority of companies, I would say it's at a relatively low level of implementation. The part which is implemented by a number of companies now is, I mean, the usage of CI/CD tools, like they will have Jenkins pipeline or something like that. But on the test automation, many companies are still quite reliant on manual regression testing. So I would say only a smaller percentage of companies have actually adopted it, and the time when companies actually decide to adopt it is when they start to feel the pain of the existing one, of the existing way of working. So when it comes to a point that the team is spending most of the sprint solving bug fixes instead of feature development, is one trigger. Another trigger is when the company suffers reputation loss with its key customers. When the customers become, start complaining, that's typically the trigger for management to start taking action.
Yeah, and so going back to the training aspect of like helping companies create the force in order to face these challenges, what approaches do you recommend?
Okay, so the approaches which I recommend is, it firstly should start with recruitment. So I will here talk about the best case of doing it, but then I will also talk the more some possible compromises which might need to be made. So in the best case scenario, what I've done, I mean, from experience, is firstly working with the team leads of the company to set up a reference example of clean architecture and application of TDD within a subset of their real product. So doing that together with the team leads, and then after that, proceeding to recruiting the junior developers. And when recruiting junior developers, instead of just testing their tech stack knowledge, like how well they've memorized Java or .NET or something like that, instead focusing on testing their design skill sets, object-oriented programming, ability to think in algorithms, abstractions. So getting those kind of juniors and testing their interest in learning. So are they interested in does it intrinsically motivate them? If you get these kind of juniors, now of course it is a smaller percentage, when you get these kind of juniors, and after that I would do daily coaching with them. So it's better to do more consistent coaching in smaller time durations, that they can learn it. It just goes better, in their practice. The first part would be applying these learnings on a small, like, demo project. That might be maybe, a few weeks or a month, but then transitioning onto the real project.
Yeah, that's cool. So you recommend basically to first of all start with setting up the foundations within the organization with
Yes.
practices like spreading practices like TDD, CI/CD, all these things. Also, engage the lead technical leadership team,
Yes,
maybe.
that's really important. So technical leads, they themselves need to want this. There's no point in talking about technical excellence and no point in talking about effectively scaling teams if the existing team leads are not motivated by this. So I would say technical leads are definitely a crucial aspect, because the external coach, I get certain amount of interaction with the team, but the technical lead is there day to day and they need to promote it.
Yes. So we have our first question from Kevin. Thanks, Kevin, for your question. So, what is the solution if the tech lead or team lead isn't aware of clean architecture, clean coding, craftsmanship? Uh, does developers need to convince him? Convince him? Sorry.
Okay, that's a very common situation. For the first part of the question about awareness, I would break it up into two possible lack of awarenesses. One is that the technical lead is not aware, that did not have practice in clean architecture or clean cloud craftsmanship, did not have practice, but and don't have time to read about it, don't have time to learn about it, and simply have no opportunity, but they have an interest. So this means that if someone comes and the tech lead would actually show interest in learning it. So that's one kind of technical lead. But the other kind of technical lead is the one who doesn't know, okay, about clean architecture, and they say clean architecture is just for conferences, demos, books, consulting. It's not something that works in reality, or it's just a waste of time, it's just overhead, whereby they have a negative reaction. So in the first case, if the tech lead actually has an interest in learning it, they can be coached. If they don't have an interest, well, then that's a showstopper at the start. So I would say if they have an interest, then they will be receptive to it. Now, in terms of developers convincing the technical lead, it depends on their personality. So the technical leads who are truly motivated by knowledge and improving themselves, they will be open to hearing about improvements from people. So if developers suggest something, the tech lead will be open to it. But if the tech lead is purely driven by ego or position or status, then in that case, they will simply reject any ideas proposed. That's a
Yes. Yeah.
good
I
question.
think I've been in both situations.
Me
So
too.
yeah, I think this was a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, it was.
Yes. So thank you, Kevin, for your question. And please, everyone, if you would like Valentina to answer your questions, you can use the chat, and I will prompt your questions in our layout. Valentina, what are the advantages of scaling teams with junior or entry level developers?
Okay. So basically, when we start off with the recruitment side, anyone who's been in recruitment knows how painful it is to hire the right seniors. Not just seniors in terms of knowledge, years of experience, but the more difficult one is actually finding people with a quality mindset. So I'm not sure how many, seniors there are who are actually quality minded, but in my estimates, it's maximal 10% of the developers, maybe 5%. So there's very small percentage of these kind of people who are seniors and who also have, who really care about quality and who are not just at the senior level because of years. So those are the ones which are really hard to find. In terms of juniors, we have a range, much bigger number available. So more candidates who are able to apply to the interview. So you get a much wider selection of candidates. The other also advantage of juniors is that you can train them and coach them much faster in best practices because they haven't learned bad code yet. So then you can actually you don't need to spend time unteaching them bad practices, so they can actually learn much faster and adopt these practices faster. And just from my own personal experience, one example is test-driven development. When coaching it to juniors, it's actually simple. We just say, okay, we have specifications. We just want to write those specifications in the form of example-based tests and then write code to satisfy it, and no big deal. But when seniors are involved, if a company hires seniors, many seniors who didn't have practice in TDD, it actually takes them longer to learn these practices. So just to summarize, the advantages of scaling teams with juniors is you have a much wider pool of candidates, so you can actually physically get more people in a faster amount of time, and you can actually coach them faster in best practices. And within 3 or 6 months, with the right kind of mentoring or coaching, these juniors can produce better quality software than many other medias or seniors who've never been exposed to best practices.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And also, linking this comment with Kevin's question, one of the advantages of working with the junior developers is that they don't have many ideas or like preconceptions about software in general. Is it's quite easy to teach them good best practices or recommended practices. I don't know, without this friction of trying
Yes,
to convince someone that certain approaches are beneficial. So probably
correct.
that's one
There's
of
no
the advantages.
convincing. Yeah, that's a good
Yes.
point.
Yes. For example, you talked about recruiting. What are the key aspects that you look for juniors in juniors? Sorry.
Okay, so first of all, it starts with the job advertisement. So the job advertisement, to attract the right people, it should mention points like I'm just saying object oriented design because it is the dominant way of thinking and is taught at universities, for example. So object oriented design, solid principles, mentioning words like clean code, mentioning words like opportunities for learning and improvement, because those are the kind of juniors that we want to be targeting. So that's the first part with the job advertisement. The second part is with the interviews. The question is, how do you actually optimize interviews when you have a much wider pool of candidates and you want to avoid wasting time? What I've found that works really well is having short, for example, phone screening followed by actual 1 hour interview. So within the phone screening, you should be very quickly to screen three things. One, some very basic theoretical knowledge about these principles or concepts related to, for example, object-oriented design and algorithms. So very short on the theory. Having an actual practical example, a very condensed practical example and asking them how to model it, so that you can see their design thinking. And point number 3, some questions which assess their motivation for software development. So that should be, for the phone screening. And in my experience, many candidates, not many, pass the phone screening, and the phone screening is short, so that's good. And then after that, when we go onto the actual interview, I prefer mainly practical interviews, because I don't want to test how well someone memorized either definitions or how well they memorized certain programming languages. So the developer can write in the choice of their preferred language, whether it's Java or .NET or whatever language they prefer, and giving them an actual sample project that they have to model, to see how they, for example, model classes, and later how they even model systems. How are they able to think in abstract ways? And I found that this approach basically worked really well, as in later these candidates recruited through this mechanism proved to be very good in terms of the results that were obtained in coaching. The point where companies get it wrong is when their interviews are not practical, so that's a mistake, and when their interviews are copy and paste of common interview questions from Google.
So, do you recommend that companies actually craft their technical tests a little bit in order to avoid copy pasting and things like that?
Correct. You can have a very small percentage. I mean, certain questions which are maybe testing definitions or principles. Okay, sure, they are copy paste from the internet, but that should be a very small percentage of the interview. The greater proportion of the interview, especially the practical case study, it should be made up, and even the topic should be changed between, like, the same concepts and skill set should be tested, but just the practical example needs to be rotated.
Yeah. So I have a quick question before prompting Alexander's question, but it's related to recruitment and so on. For example, here at Code Sherpas, our screening process is not. Let's say that we use some software similar to HackerRank, things like that. But you mentioned that you prefer a phone call at the first stage.
I do like Google Meet call, basically to test that they're not fake. I mean, okay, previous to that, we look at CVs.
Okay.
So around, for me, when I do screening, about 50% pass the CV screening. So looking at the basics of education, and do they have any practical projects, that there's something. So around 50% pass, and then after that, having these phone screening. But if a company has, maybe certain software or something where they can do also online testing, it could further reduce the recruitment if there's like that kind of test before the phone screening, to just reduce the time for developers.
Yeah, thank you. So Alexander is asking, what books are you recommending besides Clean Architecture?
Okay, so the core books which I see, I mean, aside from Uncle Bob's Clean Architecture, Clean Code, is also Kent Beck's Test-Driven Development. I highly recommend everyone to read that classic book, because there's so many things which are wrongly written about test-driven development on the internet, and not many people have actually read Kent Beck's book. So I just want to like double or triple emphasize to read Kent Beck's book. The other also influential book is Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans, because essentially Clean Architecture, it's about use cases and the domain. So that's why need both use case driven and domain driven. So I would highly recommend, at least for technical leads within companies, that they should read these books. Okay, don't force the juniors to read them, but the technical leads should definitely familiarize themselves. Oh, that's another good one, also mentioned by Emmanuel, for growing object-oriented software, guided by tests, but also having the awareness that there's also two schools of TDD. So Kent Beck classes TDD, and this one by Emmanuel Steve Freeman, Mockist TDD. I think it's good to familiarize with both, and then see what works well.
Thank you, Manuel, for
Yeah.
your suggestions. So, for the main
Yeah.
storytelling, a collaborative, visual, and agile way to build domain-driven software. So, thank you for these suggestions. And unit test, Kevin is suggesting unit test from Vladimir
That's
Korikov.
another excellent one. I think Vladimir really explained it well, how to write robust tests. And based on that suggestion, the other also book that came to my mind, which I found similar to Vladimir's book, is also software engineering at Google, which also has a whole set of series of chapters which are about test-driven development. And the other also recommendation is Uncle Bob has also a TDD series on his Clean Coders website. So purchasing those episodes is also quite a good investment.
Yes, and another suggestion from Kevin: Fundamentals of Software Architecture from Richardson Ford.
Yes, that really,
I don't know that one. I haven't read that.
well, yeah, I think it's good. Definitely, I guess the key topics for tech lead is handling both the architecture aspect and the test driven. So thanks a lot, Kevin, for that suggestion.
Yes, thank you. And regarding recruitment, because we were just talking about recruitment a little while ago, Emmanuel was suggesting that doing a kata in pair programming is also a very a good way to know how to how if this person actually communicates or in a, I don't know how to say it, but
Yes,
it's beneficial.
definitely I agree with that one. So when doing these interviews, especially the practical aspect. It's not just about giving a certain task to the developer and then okay, off you go. Here's 20 minutes for you to code. Come back with a solution. But rather, as they are developing the solution, the interviewer should have dialogue with them, that they talk through the solutions. The interviewer should also propose certain improvements to the solution, and then you can see how does the candidate react to the proposed improvement. Are they receptive to feedback? So that's important to be tested. How they communicate their ideas, and also are they able to implement these improvements. So definitely that's a really good point.
And I'm curious about something. So when you're coaching teams, what setup do you prefer? I don't know, like a solo programming, pair programming, mob programming. I don't know.
Mob programming. Many years ago, I actually transitioned from solo approach to pair programming to mob programming. The key benefit which I see, I mean, all of my coaching session is group based, so essentially mob programming style, is you get much higher energy from the team. They can all learn at once, and it also encourages interactions and ideas. So even though one person, that great to see this enthusiasm about mob programming, it is definitely great, is when one person is coding away, that you get the collective intelligence of the whole group into the solution. So it's amazing.
And another question, because I think my favorite setup is also mob programming, although pair programming is also quite nice. But whenever I have the chance, I rather go for mob programming. So when you're coaching teams, um, for example, do you? I mean, how do you organize the training of junior developers? Is like all junior developers work together in a team and you mob programming with them, or
It
are they like
varies per
spread in
team.
different teams?
Okay, so when I do coaching sessions, and these are daily coaching sessions between like half an hour or an hour, and it's essentially with one team. So this means, so the company, okay, well, starting from the start, the company wants to scale. So the recruitment efforts are then to hire, a group of developers. It might be 3 developers, 5, or something like that. I would already see 5 as sort of limit, maybe 7 as really maximum. When you get, and they all starting work at the same time, they're all new, and you want, them to bond together, you want to form a team. So the coaching is done with that team. If there's multiple teams, there would be separate sessions per team. The reason why it's like this for a small team and not for like 50 developers or 100 all at once is because each person gets an opportunity to be on the keyboard programming, and we want that group or spirit, but also personalization. So basically, to summarize, small teams.
So a comment from Georges: I experienced more programming before the pandemic, and it was perfect when everybody was on site. But it became less productive as we all went remote. Oh, that's interesting.
It is an interesting thing. Now, I happen to, even though in the past I did mentoring when I was still like employed at companies, I actually started the focus on coaching during COVID. So I actually started remote.
Oh,
And
okay. So you started more
yeah,
programming remote. Oh, that's
yes,
interesting.
yes. Prior to that, I actually didn't. I mean, I had done pair programming and maybe some group sessions, but not really mob programming. Um, I would say, at least initially, for everyone to turn on their cameras is a good point. To sort of try to imitate that human interaction, and the team should meet up also at certain points. You know, in the office. So okay, it's not the same as the office, but it can be good enough with this way.
Yeah. I was doing more programming also before the pandemic, and in my opinion, I think I prefer the remote setup, because like it's more comfortable to share screen. Of course, like passing the code, it's not so comfortable. Sometimes you need to commit when it's not so natural to commit and
Oh,
push. But
that's a good one. Now, regarding
okay.
committing, since you mentioned that, and rotations, since the focus of my coaching is essentially, well, two things: TDD and clean architecture, we're working in really small increments. That code is committable basically nearly every minute. So when a certain like timer goes off, and we want the next person to transition, there's actually no issues when you do it fully incrementally. Oh yeah, introvert people. So definitely.
Yes, so yeah, recently I attended an event focusing on diversity and inclusion, and so basically, some people were mentioning that mob programming sometimes can be an invasive activity for some people who are a little bit more introvert, or and also in remote the remote setup, it's very beneficial maybe you don't feel comfortable being closer to to people or all these things, so you can like respect your own space, and that's really beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's focusing on the code. And even for myself, I mean, I'm also an introvert. So I remember initially when I started programming, I preferred just programming alone. It took some time to transition to the whole teamwork. So I would say a remote model that does make it also more inclusive.
Yes, and Mavi was asking before, what do you think about the team lead who tells that it's not possible to hire juniors in their
Yes.
team due to the nature of the project?
Wow, I've heard the exact same sentence. I don't know how many times I've heard it, so many. So the typical sentence is this project is really complex. This project requires a lot of experience. This project can't be done, like, there's no way that the juniors can even do this project. Now, in that case, since I've faced that challenge as well, I basically did convince the management and team lead that yet it is possible. But then I convinced them, okay, due to having built trust prior to that, and
How did you do that?
so the way that I basically did it is by emphasizing the importance of system of work rather than the people. My key argument was as follows. If a certain product has automated tests, and especially following the test driven development practices, it means that the specification is not in people's head, specification is in the source code, and that when someone comes in, even a junior, give them, when you give them a new task, at least you have protection from the existing tests if they break something. So I said it's actually safe for a junior to join a team where there's, a high level of test automation. But in the opposite case, where there's a product but there's no test automation, I said even if you bring in the best developer in the world, due to absence of regression tests, every human can make a mistake. So it actually did turn out that way in reality. Um, it is safer to hire juniors to work on, a product where there's test-driven development. It's safer compared to hiring even seniors to work on a product where there's no test automation. So just to summarize the response to this, it's not about the complexity of the product, but to me, it's about, is the team using CI/CD and TDD? If they are using those practices, you can hire juniors. If they're not using those practices, then you're going to have risks with everyone, and then, okay, don't hire juniors.
And what about projects that have lots of delivery pressure?
That's another good one. So we have two scenarios again here with the delivery pressure. One is that there's already CI/CD and TDD in place. The other one is when it's not yet in place. If it is in place, delivery pressure is not a problem, because TDD actually helps you, to keep on sustainably delivering quality. But in the case where you have delivery pressure and the company decides to introduce practices like TDD and clean architecture, there will be a slowdown in delivery for, let's say, I approximate generally 3 months. So management will actually need to accept that reduction in delivery if they want this to go forward. Or management might say, no, we're going to go in this way. The main point is, if the development team is overworked consistently working overtime, there's no point, like, even if you introduce training or coaching, they will just be focusing on their production bug fixes. You won't get the improvement. So management would then have to actually accept a reduction in delivery, maybe for that team. So I'm not saying that the whole company go on training or coaching, but for that team, it will need to be accepted. And if they don't accept it, well, they'll simply hit a roadblock in the next several months or years when they won't have a choice.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But I think that's also challenging because usually companies or teams in companies are interdependent, so it's also difficult to accept like a slowdown in delivering one team because probably that team impacts others, right? So yeah.
Uh, yes, but then it comes back also to business prioritization. So
Yes.
it's a bit of a bigger topic. I'm saying in order to get these improvements, learning itself, how shall I say, requires concentration, and management would have to accept if they're going to go forward with this.
Yeah, so Kevin is saying the problem is not really junior developers, but the ability for the team to accompany him correctly. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
That's a deep one. Um, good to have come to that realization. Quite often, the attitude that many companies or developers have is that the junior is difficult burden, but it's actually a symptom that the company does not have adequate systems or practices. Like, your junior is actually the test, because he's the ultimate test. If when a new junior comes in, if their onboarding is accelerated, and if they can very quickly jump into the best practices, it means your company has a good systems and practices in place. And if onboarding is too painful, then it simply means the company is actually lacking adequate practices.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And for example, Manuel is asking, in what order do you introduce juniors to TDD?
Okay, so the first question is, are we working on a greenfield product or a brownfield, like legacy product? I will firstly speak about legacy product, because that's a common situation, and then the greenfield one. So in the first part, before introducing the developers into the actual real product, I would spend around 2 weeks that they would be working on a demo product, so like a simple to-do CRUD app or something. Their first task is essentially looking at tutorials just to get the REST API set up, the database. It's a plain CRUD application. There's no clean architecture. There's no domain-driven design. There's no tests at all. But that's what I see as the first step. Second step is learning the mechanics of syntax of how to even write a unit test, again through tutorials. That's done in test last approach, so doing the test retrospectively. After they become comfortable with the mechanics of like what a unit test looks like, integration test, etc., that's the moment when you can actually invert and switch and say, okay, wait, we will now just switch the order. We will do the tests first, and that can be done on that demo project. But I keep the demo project short, like maximum 2 weeks, simply because obviously management wants to see results on the real product. So then when they go on to the real product, for existing code base, they will need to write tests last. And I firstly do write retrospective tests together with the developers. But for the new features, when they get new user stories assigned to them, then we actually apply TDD. So just to summarize, I don't go into TDD right away. I first do mechanics of writing a test last, and then TDD. And the main thing I keep on repeating to juniors is, okay, for TDD, let's look at the requirements. Let's now write these requirements in the form of like an example, and that's pretty much it. I like that comment. I think you're on mute, or?
Yes, thank you. So you need to learn how to do proper tests before starting being able to do tests first. Yeah, I totally agree with this.
Yes, and the other also thing which happens in the mind, the biggest shift when they do TDD is having to switch to incremental thinking. They are used to upfront thinking, especially from university and exams and big projects, and they always try to think of the whole solution upfront. So that's the other I wanted to mention, learning aspect. When I tell them, wait, we don't want to go further, let's do this minimum by minimum, and for them it's like, whoa, but this is like too simple. Well, yes, we're going the simple way.
Yes. And also another comment from Emmanuel. They start with design first, then testing, then TDD, which totally makes sense. Then they introduce refactoring, macro design, cloud. Maybe this is a path, right, to
Yes.
train people.
Now, okay. In terms of, I also used to start with design and clean code several years ago, and then I stopped. Now my sequence is mechanics of tests, TDD, and then through refactoring we learn clean code and better design.
Yeah,
Um,
so design emerges in the refactoring phase,
yes,
and
yes.
why did you chose that approach?
Okay. That's a good one. It actually took me years to come to that conclusion. I would say because initially, I mean, the main thing which I did value in the past was clean code. I mean, that was for me a big motivation, and I was also, how shall I say, skilled in upfront design. So this was before TDD, and having to make the best optimal solution right at the start. It meant when I was working with junior developers that we would just have a long analysis session. Okay, let's drill down, the class diagrams, the best possible design, and after this is done, there's no going back. Like this is it. We're stuck with this. Later, when I switched to a test-driven development approach and essentially incremental development, that was the time when I essentially switched to deferral of clean code to essentially refactoring phase.
Yeah, that's interesting. And another question, like for example, for companies that would like to try out this growth model and start training juniors in order to scale their teams, how should they get ready for that change, so for that transition?
Okay, just sorry, one minute. I just had too much light. So in terms of the companies getting ready for the transition, the first step is the mindset. So mindset both on behalf of management and mindset on behalf of the technical leadership. They both need to be aligned. They both need to accept that quality equals speed. So that's first step. If that mindset doesn't exist, we can't proceed forward. If they have that mindset, then there's two possibilities of introducing a change into the company. It could be done by someone internally, or it could be done by someone externally. If there already exists an employee within that company who is really experienced in TDD and clean architecture, has already applied it, and has coaching skills and enjoys training and coaching more than programming themselves, essentially someone who is an in-house coach who's just happens to be an employee. That's one way of doing it, though in practice there's not that many people who exist with that profile. Otherwise they wouldn't be employed. The other possibility is engaging someone who's an external trainer or coach to introduce these practices. So someone who already has experience in both TDD and clean architecture and in terms of training or coaching teams. Now, I do want to distinguish the difference between training versus coaching. So if a company engages a trainer, the trainer will typically come with some pre-prepared code examples, and it will be more kata style training, but not on the real companies like code. So developers might learn something and say it was a really great session, but then when when it's time to actually apply it in the real product, they might say, actually the training, it was a lot simpler compared to our real code. This is not applicable. And they simply continue working the way they were working before. The other possibility is that the company engages a coach. That's a much more, how shall I say, more direct relationship and way of working, because the coach actually helps the team on the real product and is there for the team to guide them through these daily challenges. And coaching is, in terms of what's most powerful, I mean, things like watching a short course is least effective way of learning. The next way of learning is having training or mentoring. Okay, that's effective, but the one that, how shall I say, gives the highest effectiveness is coaching. So just to summarize, there needs to be a mindset on behalf of the company, and there needs to be coaching, either internal or external, in order to actually implement this change, because it's a huge change, transformation, and it doesn't just come by itself.
Yes, yeah, I really like the distinction that you made between training and coaching. So it's completely different. Training is more like I'm an expert on this topic, and I will pass on to you my knowledge, my
Yes,
expertise on this area. But coaching or technical coaching is something completely different. It's about helping others reach that technical expertise or expertise in general, but by themselves, right? So
correct.
it's completely
A trainer is like a teacher. It's a one-directional communication mechanism. Trainer speaks, and the developers ask questions. Whereas coach, you actually don't give the answers. You give guidance, and you want them to come to realizations.
so for everyone interested a little bit more in technical coaching, you can visit this website, and then there's also a very nice book from Emily Beige, technical coaching with the Saman method, something like that, and there you will find more information about what technical coaching is, how to implement it, and why it can help yourself and your team in order to achieve growth, and expanding skills. So it's very nice. Also, more questions. Well, we have some more comments. Like for example, Tema. Sorry, yeah, Hitem. Sorry if I don't pronounce your name very well.
Oh,
Hitem
that's
was saying very
excellent.
insightful.
That's a really, I mean, I'm a huge fan of systems thinking. Even though I guess we didn't talk much during this presentation about systems thinking, but essentially there's two approaches of scaling. The ineffective way is when everything is just in people's heads, you're just relying on pure talent, there's no system, there's no process, there's no knowledge base. In that case, it's the people, and then when those developers leave, the company essentially does not have intellectual asset of the knowledge. But when you actually have a system, it's like collective intelligence that you can harvest, and it's actually the only way to grow scalably is with a systematic approach. So to actually scale effectively, these technical excellence has to be systematically applied across the company. So that's an excellent
So
remark.
how would you do that? Systematization, or how would you apply that systematically?
Okay, it all starts incrementally. So at the beginning, this change should be applied to just one team on one product or one module, and they should see the value of it. Then after that, it should be gradually spread throughout the organization. Again, it can either spread internally or with external engagement. Then once it's spread across multiple teams, this is when you need to have collaborative sessions between the teams, that they together discuss their approaches, and that they come to some uniform way of working. And this should be also then documented into a knowledge base. And then whoever, and this is how you can actually encourage, okay, you get both standardization in way of working, but you can also encourage innovation. Because again, teams, since there's new technology or new ways of working, if someone again experiments with something or finds something better, that instead of keeping the knowledge just to their team, they can actually contribute to that shared knowledge base. So yeah, that's definitely an effective way of working.
Yes, yes, I totally agree with that. And I have one more question for you. So, is there any situation where you don't recommend to like scale teams with
Mhm.
juniors?
Okay, that's a really good question. So if a company is not willing to invest in technical excellence, it can either be due to management issues in the company, or technical leads are simply not interested or in technical excellence and want to continue doing things the way they've always been working. In that case, that company will not have technical excellence. And in that case, I recommend not hiring juniors, but instead hiring pretty much only seniors, and relying on superheroes who will be able to keep this system going.
Is that a bit sarcastic, maybe, or?
Yes. So for me, juniors are a litmus test of how good a system is. So only if you have a good system, you can hire juniors. If you don't have a good system, you can't and you shouldn't hire juniors until you change your system first.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree with you. So Mavi is also agree. So yeah, I totally agree, and I think that Mavi will also agree with us that actually teams that are able to onboard less experienced developers are the ones who reach higher levels of maturity. And actually, hiring juniors helps everyone in the team and in the company, because processes must be optimized, improved. Things are, or everything gets better documentation. Senior or mid developers have the chance to grow by explaining others or by helping others to grow also. So it's not
Exactly.
only, yeah, so things are not only about like writing code super fast and delivering user stories like also super fast, but about improving the team and the company. So I think it's very beneficial for everyone. It's like the
Exactly.
test. Yeah.
I really liked how you described it, because in that case, seniors and medias get a chance to learn more about mentoring and about knowledge sharing. And furthermore, the junior developers that you hire, the way that you can continue growing scalably is that these juniors will later become medias. So you can actually get, I guess, the whole your leadership promotion within the company. So imagine you invest in people's technical excellence, and these people later become the next leaders.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I totally agree with you. So it's been an hour so far. I don't know. Would you like to continue with the conversation, or shall we start like
Yeah, this
closing now?
was exciting. So if there's more questions, I mean, I do want to take this opportunity, because it's not every day, to talk about this topic.
Yes. So I have more questions for you in the meantime. Um, what environment related to the topics that we are speaking of right now? Like, what environment should a team foster in order to allow juniors to integrate, grow, and add value?
Okay, so in terms of environment, I see the following as the minimal. First of all, psychological safety. So people need to feel safe in the environment, because if they don't feel safe, or if they feel that someone will make fun of them, or that they will lose their position if they say they don't know something, or that they need to learn something, then there's no possibility of learning. So the first step is psychological safety and trust between the team members, and getting and the team which is actually focused on achieving the goal, rather than looking good individually. As in, the emphasis that the team has a collective goal, and that achieving that team goal is more important than personal interests. So I see that as a minimum. After we have that foundation, and notice here I didn't even say the word clean code, after we have that foundation, then on top of that, we can actually start, the learning pathway. Now, there's basically two pathways of growth and learning. One is the organizational aspect, so how people communicate, what tools they're using, how are they organizing their work. That's one aspect. But the even bigger aspect is the technical excellence aspect. So as a team, taking steps forward in terms of essentially achieving continuous delivery. It's, again, I emphasize, I think I've repeated it so multiple times, the team lead, whoever has, how should I say, authority in the organization, needs to be on board with technical excellence. And then that combined with psychological safety, and then the team will be able to essentially have this environment where they can achieve this.
Yes, in my experience, in order to help a little bit with this team tech lead situation managers, so what I found that helps a lot is maybe framing that investing in the team, in the skills, and also in technical excellence is not because we like to build like super high quality software, and that's also very nice, and it's about money and it's about
Correct.
delivery, and it's about the product, so removing the technical aspect from the conversation and framing it in a business from a business perspective helps a lot.
Yes, it's really important to keep the audience in mind. And I mean, I'm going to say one thing for sure. I never sold TDD. I basically the only thing I sell is the reduction of maintenance costs for the product company, and ultimately that's what management cares about. So when talking to management, I mean, if someone wants to make these changes within their company or start some discussions, you start discussions about essentially time, money, and customer reputation. I will say these arguments in case maybe it's useful for people with management. So the first benefit is in terms of revenue. If you deliver reliable software and that the customers are really satisfied with the software, you increase customer retention, so the company will get more money. So that's an example of additional revenue. You also get cost savings. You reduce the total maintenance cost of the software. So that's the cost benefit. The company also has a better market position. They can be competitive in the market. They can release changes really quickly. So if business has a new idea, it can be released very quickly into the market. And additionally, there's increased employee satisfaction. So employees will be working with much less stress because of these, practices. So then you get everything. You get higher customer satisfaction, higher profits, market competitiveness, and employee satisfaction. And this is what ultimately business cares about.
Yeah, I highlighted this sentence that you just mentioned because yeah, it's very good. I never sold TDD. I sold the reduction of maintenance cost, and that's what managers buy. And you also talked about employee satisfaction, and that one is very true.
Yes.
And that relates to developer experience and these topics. Yeah.
Yes, now that's the kind of argument which is also useful. I mean, when you want to push these changes together with developers, you need to talk, with developers. Okay, how you're feeling, and quite often the developers will say that they are, stressed out, that it's very high pressure, that business is requesting changes all over the time, all the time, that they wish that the business would have less ideas. So those are the typical comments that developers make in companies which don't have these practices. And when these practices are actually instituted, when you have continuous delivery, it means you can deploy to production at any point. You're safe. So that's, you already feel psychologically, less stress. If there's less stress, okay, better health, probably longer lifespan. Okay, I guess those are. I guess we've gone very far in terms of the benefits of TDD and clean architecture.
Yes, and Yuli's asking, what do you do to foster a generative culture instead of bureaucratic or pathological ones?
Okay, I would say, in my experience, it starts with the top. It starts with the leadership and the underlying motivation. So if those people who are in leadership positions, simply because people promote people who are like them, if those people are more concerned about results, essentially having excellent results, and less concerned with their ego, and those leaders who actually want the best possible results, they will be more likely to actually promote knowledge sharing and to promote innovation, and to also promote people who have that mindset. In the opposite case, if the actual leadership is not driven really by achieving the best results for the company, but is much more ego driven, and how well they will personally then they will be driven by self-interest. And then when people in leadership are driven primarily by self-interest, it does propagate across the whole company. I think that's a really, excellent question that was raised. I see it as a whole topic in itself. I just want to say that technical excellence can only be achieved within a generative culture.
Yeah, that's totally right. And you was also posting a question before, like have you tried, like it was a question for everyone, but I want to bring it here. Have you tried using a mentoring program within your company or project?
Okay, so maybe I can share some experience back in the time, maybe when I
Yes.
worked as an employee. So, in most companies where I worked with, when I was an employee, there was talks about mentoring programs, but it was very lightweight. The mentoring program was basically when a new junior, for example, or a new person comes to the company. That's one example, and they have someone whom they can ask questions, be guided by. Now, in practice, since the actual mentor was constantly putting out fires and just trying to get their work done, there wasn't really a proper mentoring, and the only mentoring was maybe when the other person was totally stuck in something, like totally blocked, and there wasn't really much space for actual learning. That was at least my experience. In a lot of companies, even who say they have mentoring programs, I view it more in terms of marketing, like that they say they have a mentoring program, but not many actually execute. In order to actually execute a successful mentoring program, there should be dedicated, the company should be on board with dedicated time for this, and should also manage project pressure. Because if the company is only focused on delivery and zero focus on learning, then we can't have mentoring programs being successful. So to summarize, there needs to be a learning initiative first.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree. And to complement a little bit this information, I've worked in companies who had an established mentoring program, and the results are amazing. Like within a few months, like the any person who is at this level, with the right mentoring and the right support, uh, really increases their skills and their abilities. So it's amazing, like the benefits of a mentoring program. But of course this also consumes some resources, and in order to make this scalable, like companies need to set up the proper infrastructure. So for example, I've worked for companies, and I'm helping companies, like currently, in order to set up these mentoring or training programs. I don't know. And there are, normally there are two setups that companies want to try. The first one is when developers within the company are the ones who mentor and coach, like the new joiners, the apprentices, and so on. And that is good because on one hand, like knowledge about the organization is passed on, and so on. But it's quite, or it can be a little bit time consuming for developers in
Yes.
the company, if they want, if they need to 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 accomplish their delivery tasks, the usual tasks. So that option, in my opinion, is the most time consuming, and it can lead to burnout for the mentors. And the other option is to have dedicated people uh, that take charge of these mentoring and coaching programs. And it can be either developers from the company who can and want to do that job, or it can be external people. And also another mixed option is to have uh, um, internal, like let's say internal mentors from within the teams, combined with a dedicated person uh, f- for for short amount of time, like let's say 2 months, one developer will dedicate only for training, because maybe that developer also has those or would like to train people or to mentor people. That also happens. And maybe those companies can also get some external help from technical coaches, uh, to actually make sure that that things happen and in a structured and scalable way. And these technical coaches can also help the mentors develop their skills, their coaching and mentoring skills. So I've seen those models, and well, yeah, maybe that info
I think
helps.
that that's a good points which you mentioned. In order for mentoring to succeed, the mentors, they need to be people who actually like mentoring as a first
Exactly.
step. Now, some developers like mentoring, and when the company, in my experience, provided opportunities mentoring to them, those employees were really happy and actually contributed positive results. But there's also other people who are maybe interested just purely in programming and not so much mentoring. So I would say taking into account their actual motivation. Also, in terms of format, one format is one-to-one, but that again can be more time consuming in my experience. The other format is group-based mentoring. So there might be a small group of people, and instead of one-on-one mentoring, and organizing in internal knowledge sharing sessions. So, for example, one person for that week needs to read up on a topic or share their experiences from a project, and then they present it to a group. So that's an example of a more time effective mentoring approach. And the last thing is actually building a mentoring culture. Now, what I'm actually doing, since I mentioned about building teams from scratch, from recruitment, the reason why I focus on someone's interest in learning and knowledge is because we want to hire not just developers, but we want to hire the next mentors as well. So I'm actually looking for
Yes.
those kind of characteristics right in the interview stage when interviewing developers. And then when you coach these kind of developers in technical excellence practices, after, for example, 6 months, I coach them in how to mentor new developers, because here's the thing: coaches are not scalable.
Hmm.
Coaching is high impact, but there's not that many coaches available and time is limited. But if,
Yes.
if the coach actually builds a mentoring culture within the company, then it is scalable. And that's actually a big thing, a big focus for me, building that mentoring culture within the company.
Yes, yeah, that's a very good point. And one last comment, like them uh, share with us that transparency is very important also, and it's important to make vision and strategy roadmap clear for juniors so that they will surprise us with innovative ideas.
Definitely. So I would say, first and foremost, I mean, having that transparency is useful as a first step for everyone to have the same alignment on the goal. So even talking about existing company employees, if the vision and strategy is not shared, everyone will be going in different directions. The company will not have a common goal. And secondly, when this is shared with juniors, it makes them feel part of the company. And when the company has that openness to innovation, so instead of treating juniors as people who will do like just the simplest or the most boring task or something, then the company won't get innovation. But if you actually start giving incrementally challenges to juniors, and actually instead of giving them answers, you ask them for their ideas, then you're promoting feedback and innovation.
Yes, that's right. So we've been here for almost 1 hour and a half. So
Yes.
I think I will call it a day.
Yes, it was a
uh,
really a great time. I guess this is almost as long as technical meetups. It's great that that everyone has so much motivation, and I mean, from all this discussion, I can really see that people are interested in, how do you actually introducing technical excellence within the company, and having technical leadership which actually promotes this technical excellence, and building a really transparent and open culture which is actually open to learning. And then ultimately the juniors are a test of your company's maturity, I mean, as you mentioned before. So I think that this was a really I really enjoyed the discussion, and I hope that there will be maybe further opportunities in the future, or networking. And as usual, if anyone has additional questions after this, feel free to connect.
so Anjul is thanking us for this session. Thank you, everyone, and you for being with us today. Valentina, is there anything else that you would like to share with us before closing?
Yes, I just want to mention. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. Many people know I'm already posting articles about TDD and clean architecture. So feel free to connect or follow me on LinkedIn, also Twitter. Additionally, I'm making GitHub sample projects in Java.net, maybe later even other tech stack, which are essentially small minified projects which illustrate clean architecture and TDD. So feel free to look at those samples as well on my GitHub profile. Again, it might be useful to some people who are team leads here in this audience, and who maybe are looking for practical examples to illustrate to their team. So yeah, and feel free to send, as I mentioned, any messages or any further questions if there's anything that you would find useful.
Yes, I was like prompting the thank you messages because it's also always super nice when people gets engaged in the conversation and we add value. So yeah, I totally recommend everyone to follow Valentina on Twitter and LinkedIn because she always shares very useful content and very high quality content on software architecture and these topics. So yeah, you will get lots of value from following her. Thank you,
Thanks a
everyone,
lot.
and see you next time in Code Sherpas Talks. Thank you.
Thanks a
There's a
lot.
dog barking.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.